For decades, every American president has faced the same quiet embarrassment. When the guest list grows too large, the White House runs out of room. Not policy room, physical room. So tents go up on the South Lawn at enormous cost. And after the music stops, the grass is torn up and rebuilt again. Now, Donald Trump says he has a solution. A massive East Wing ballroom. Permanent, secure, and big enough to end this problem once and for all. But here's the question you should be asking. Is this about fixing a logistical flaw or rewriting how power reshapes historic institutions? Because this project is not just concrete and columns, it is speed over process, loyalty over oversight, and ambition colliding with precedent. Supporters see efficiency. Critics see a foregone conclusion. If you care about how decisions are made at the very top, stay with me. Because to understand this ballroom, we first need to understand the problem it claims to solve. At its core, this story is not about architecture. It is about systems under pressure. The White House was never designed for modern spectacle. State dinners grew larger, security grew heavier, logistics grew more complex. Yet the building stayed the same. The East Room holds about 200 people. Anything larger spills outdoors. That means tents, temporary kitchens, temporary power, temporary security corridors, and temporary solutions come with permanent costs, hundreds of thousands for each event, lawn damage repaired again and again, bills quietly paid by the State Department, across administrations, across parties. For years, planners studied alternatives. They stalled, not because solutions were impossible, but because no one wanted to touch the politics of building next to history. Trump changed that calculation. He didn't ask whether a permanent ballroom was controversial. He asked why the problem still existed. That shift matters, because once a president decides speed is the solution, the process itself becomes the battleground. To see why this problem lingered so long, we have to go back to how the White House learned to resist change. For most of its history, the White House has survived by saying no. No to expansion. No to scale. No to modern demands that might distort its symbolism. The building was meant to project continuity, not capacity. Small rooms, carefully controlled sightlines. A house that resists becoming a convention center. As global diplomacy changed, the strain became obvious. State visits grew larger, media presence exploded. Security protocols hardened. But instead of permanent adaptation, the system chose workaround after workaround. Tents, temporary structures, invisible costs absorbed by other agencies. The entity stayed pristine. The burden shifted outward. Over the years, studies were quietly commissioned. The National Park Service explored options. New structures were imagined, then shelved, not because they lacked merit, but because advocating for change carried political risk. No president wanted to be remembered as the one who altered the people's house. So inertia won until it didn't, because history doesn't just resist change. Eventually, it invites confrontation. And that confrontation arrived the moment demolition began. The first real crisis didn't begin with a vote. It began with a demolition. The East Wing came down, quietly, with little warning and almost no public consultation. That space mattered. For decades, it housed first ladies, staff, ceremonial functions woven into daily governance. And suddenly, it was gone. President Donald Trump framed it as decisiveness. A developer's instinct. Why debate endlessly when the problem is obvious? But institutions don't measure legitimacy by speed. They measure it by process. The National Capital Planning Commission, long tasked with safeguarding federal land and buildings, was sidelined. So were traditional sequencing norms. Below-grade work moved forward. Foundations poured, options erased before discussion could begin. Supporters called it efficiency. Critics called it irreversible momentum. If this were only about a ballroom, the backlash would fade. But it wasn't. It was about who gets to decide first and who is allowed to object later. If you think oversight still matters, pay attention, because once foundations are set, the argument changes. And next, we need to examine the mechanism that made resistance so fragile. What made this possible wasn't secrecy. It was structure. The approval system was never built for a president who moves like a developer. It assumes deliberation, sequencing. Alternatives presented before decisions are locked in. But here's the mechanism most people miss. Certain actions don't require review. Demolition, if framed correctly, can move ahead. Below-grade work can be defined as preliminary. Foundations can be poured before anyone debates what should sit on top. By the time oversight bodies engage, the most important choices are already behind them. That is how process becomes procedural theater. Not illegal, but hollow. And then comes the second layer, personnel. Oversight only works if independence exists. Replace expertise with loyalty. And review becomes affirmation. Questions narrow, alternatives disappear. The conversation shifts from should we to how do we make this look acceptable. This is how power learns to move faster than resistance. Not by abolishing rules, but by outpacing them. And once that dynamic is set, a second crisis is inevitable. Because when process bends, public trust is the next thing to snap. The second crisis arrived not with bricks, but with optics. Cost estimates escalated. What began as a $200 million privately funded project ballooned toward $400 million. The East Wing scale dwarfed the executive mansion itself. Architects were replaced, designs reimagined, and debates over alternatives quietly disappeared. For many, the question was no longer about practicality. It was about precedent. How far can one administration push before historic norms collapse? How much oversight can be bypassed before scrutiny turns into litigation? Courts and Congress started to notice. Lawsuits were filed. Investigations began. Questions about transparency, donor funding, and asbestos risks emerged. Yet amidst the uproar, the ballroom promises a solution for a problem that has plagued presidents for decades. No more soggy lawns, no more temporary tents, no more makeshift kitchens or broken heels trudging across the South Lawn. For guests, for planners, for tradition, it's a practical fix. But practicality now exists in tension with precedent, scrutiny, and trust. The true impact of the ballroom reaches beyond logistics. For the people who attend, it transforms experience. No more racing across lawns in heels or tuxedos. No more worrying about temporary facilities failing mid-event. A permanent space promises comfort, elegance, and security. But for you, the observer of power, it's a lesson in influence. How quickly processes can bend when ambition meets loyalty. How decisions that appear practical also reshape governance. It invites questions about who benefits and who bears risk. Private donors, contractors, planners, all swept into the orbit of a project propelled by authority. And for ordinary citizens, the lesson is subtler. Infrastructure is never neutral. It carries politics, ideology, and precedents with every foundation poured. As the East Wing rises, the story of its construction becomes part of the story of American power itself. And as we consider its wider implications, we begin to see ripples that extend far beyond the ballroom. The reverberations of this project extend far beyond the White House lawn. Globally, every move signals priorities. Allies and adversaries alike watch how authority is exercised. A president who bends rules for efficiency at home may inspire admiration, caution, or concern abroad. Diplomacy is performative. State dinners, official receptions, and ceremonial events are signals of stability and competence. A permanent Grand ballroom changes not just logistics but optics, projecting power, influence, and permanence. Meanwhile, institutional norms are under strain. Oversight bodies, historic commissions, and advisory boards see their authority challenged. When a decision is effectively pre-approved by loyalists, the precedent echoes through future administrations. The balance between efficiency and oversight, ambition and accountability, local logistics and global perception, all of it converges here. And as this transformation unfolds, it forces the world to reconsider not just what the White House is, but what it can become. Looking ahead, the future of this project unfolds in three possible scenarios. In the best case, the ballroom functions as promised. Large gatherings proceed smoothly. Historic integrity is preserved. Oversight processes are respected retroactively. The White House gains a permanent, secure venue that solves a decades-long logistical challenge. In a moderate scenario, the structure succeeds physically but falters politically. Cost overruns provoke continuing lawsuits. Public trust erodes. Oversight bodies are weakened, leaving a lingering question: at what cost did practicality come? In the worst case, the project becomes a cautionary tale. Oversight bypassed entirely, historic fabric compromised. Political backlash dominates headlines. The ballroom, intended as a symbol of efficiency, becomes a monument to unchecked authority. Each path reflects a deeper principle. Power, process, and legacy are inseparable. How this plays out will shape perceptions of executive authority for years, and the choices made here may define the balance between efficiency and accountability for the next generation. As the dust settles and the walls rise, one truth becomes clear: this is more than a ballroom. It is a lens into how decisions are made at the highest level, how ambition interacts with institutions, how process can be streamlined or bypassed entirely. For you watching, it's a lesson in vigilance. Oversight is only meaningful if it is allowed to act. Tradition matters, not for nostalgia, but because it preserves balance and accountability. Yet, even amid controversy, the ballroom solves a problem that presidents have faced for generations. It brings permanence, functionality, and a stage for diplomacy that was long overdue. So consider this: what looks practical today can redefine norms tomorrow. What seems efficient may challenge the very systems meant to safeguard fairness. And the next time you see power in motion, ask who decides and how. If you want to understand the full implications of executive authority and the lessons hidden in projects like this, stay with us for the next analysis. Subscribe and hit the bell to follow how history, power, and policy intersect in ways that shape the world.